I came to Nevada with $14, a smooth gray stone from my sister's yard in Missouri, and a letter from a man who could not be bothered to meet my train. The train came in just past noon, when the light off the high desert was flat and mean, and the platform boards had been baking since first light. She stepped down with a canvas bag over one shoulder and a smaller one in her left hand, and she stood still for a moment, the way a person does when they are deciding whether to look uncertain or whether to simply look. She chose the latter, chin level, eyes moving across the town the way you read a room before you walk into it. Harland Flats, Nevada. Population 300 and something, depending on the season. One main street unpaved, still holding the faint damp of rain, 2 nights before the kind of damp that would not last past 2 in the afternoon. A general store with a wooden awning, a livery at the far end. 2 men sitting outside the saloon who had already stopped their conversation to watch her. She was 63 years old, and she knew what it meant when men stopped talking to look at a woman who had just stepped off a train alone. She had been visible before. She knew what to do with it. She had the letter in her coat pocket. She had read it enough times that she no longer needed to take it out. Room and board, some cooking, some management of the household accounts. A working knowledge of horses preferred, but not essential. The arrangement was temporary by design. Those were the words used. Temporary by design. She had found the phrasing oddly honest for a classified advertisement, and it was that honesty more than anything else that had made her write back. The man who placed the advertisement had sent one reply. 4 sentences. The work was real. The farm was 7 miles out. The last woman had stayed 3 weeks. He would meet her at the train. He was not on the platform. She stood there for the length of time it takes to register that fact, without making it mean too much. Then she set down the smaller bag and looked up the street again, slower this time. 7 miles out. She did not know which direction 7 miles meant in this valley, where the land ran flat to the east and lifted in pale ridges to the west. She knew no one. She had $14 and some cents in the inner pocket of her coat, folded inside a piece of cloth she had sewn shut herself, because that was the kind of thing a woman learned to do when she had lost everything once and did not intend to lose it again. There was a small stone she had carried from her sister's yard in Missouri, smooth and gray-green, worn to the shape of a thumb from years of handling. She had put it in the left pocket of her coat, so she would have something to touch if she needed to. She touched it now briefly, then let it go. The station master came out from his office, looked at her, looked at the empty platform, and went back inside. A woman near the general store had paused with her basket and was pretending she had not noticed. The 2 men outside the saloon were still watching. She picked up the smaller bag, squared the larger one on her shoulder, and walked to the edge of the platform where a bench sat in the thin shade of an overhang. She sat down. She folded her hands in her lap, one of them resting on the outside of her coat pocket where the stone was. And she waited. The town went back to its business, slowly, watching from the corners of its eyes. She had been sitting perhaps 20 minutes when a wagon came down the main street from the north end of town and pulled up in front of the livery. The man who climbed down from the bench moved without hurry, but also without waste. The kind of motion that comes from years of work that has a cost. He was somewhere in his late 50s, broad through the shoulders, wearing a coat that had been good once and was still serviceable. He said something brief to the livery boy, who nodded and took the horses. Then he stood on the street and looked at her, not the way the others had looked. The others had looked to assess. He looked to confirm something he had already reasoned out before the wagon stopped. He crossed to the platform. She did not stand. She did not smooth her dress. She let him come, and she looked back at him with her chin level and her hands quiet in her lap. He stopped at the edge of the platform. "The train came in an hour ago," he said. It did. He looked at her bags, then at the bench, then at her. "I had a wheel to see about." He said it without apology, but not without acknowledgement. There was a difference. "I waited," she said, which was only the fact of it. He nodded once, the kind of nod that closes a topic rather than opens one. "I have the wagon if you are ready." She stood, and he reached for the larger bag before she had fully straightened. He did not ask. He simply picked it up. She kept the smaller one and followed him off the platform and across the street to where the wagon sat 2 horses, standing still and patient. The wagon bed was clean, which she noticed. Not swept for her. Clean from habit. There was a folded canvas in the corner, and a coil of rope, and a wooden crate with a hinged lid that had been mended along one edge with new iron strapping. Someone had done that work carefully. He put her bag in the bed and came around to the bench. She was already up. He settled beside her without comment and gathered the reins. The town watched them leave. She felt it on the back of her neck. The general store, the saloon, the woman with the basket, who had probably already found someone to tell. She looked forward at the street opening out to road, and then to open country. The land ran flat for a long distance before it lifted. The sky was very large. A few clouds to the northwest sat motionless as though they had forgotten to move. He did not speak. She did not speak. The horses settled into their rhythm. After a mile, she took her hand out of her pocket. The road narrowed after the first mile. The ruts were dry, and the horses moved through them without effort, their heads low and steady. She watched the way he held the reins. Loose, not slack. His hands rested on his knees between the small adjustments the road required. He had done this enough times that his body did it without him. To the left, a fence line ran parallel to the road. The posts were weathered to gray. Beyond it, a field that had been cut and not yet turned stubble in long, pale rows. A crow walked along the far edge with a deliberateness that seemed almost purposeful. She put her other hand in her lap. His name was Beckett Voss. She had learned that from the letter. She had learned very little else. She knew he was a widower because the letter mentioned the last woman had stayed 3 weeks, and the tone of it suggested he had not expected her to stay longer. She knew the farm worked horses. She knew the accounts needed management. She had read between those lines the way she had learned to read between lines over 63 years of living. And what she had read was this: a man holding something together alone for long enough that he had forgotten how much it cost him. She recognized that. She had been that person herself not so long ago. The farm appeared before he announced it. She saw the roof of the barn first, its pitch plain against the sky, and then the house coming up. Behind a stand of cottonwoods that were starting to go yellow at the tips, early for it. The leaves moved in a wind she could not yet feel from the bench. He pulled off the road onto a packed dirt track, and the horses turned without being told. The yard was not tidy, but it was organized. There was a difference. A stack of fence posts near the barn wall. A water trough that had a crack along one side sealed with tar. Tack hanging on iron hooks beside the barn door. Bridles. A spare collar. A length of chain coiled over a peg. Everything had a place. Some of the places were improvised, but they held. He stopped the wagon at the barn and climbed down. She climbed down herself. He unloaded her bag without ceremony and set it near the house door. The house was single-story, built from cut timber. The gaps between the boards filled and painted over, but still visible as lines. A porch across the front, 3 steps up. A wooden bench along the rail that someone had worn smooth from use. The door stood open. He said the kitchen is through the back. There are 2 rooms. One is mine. The other is yours. She nodded. She picked up her bag and went up the steps. At the door, she stopped and looked back once, not at him, but at the land. The field that ran south from the fence line. The brown grass at its edge. The sky that here away from town seemed to press down with its full weight. Then she went inside. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and something older. Dust, maybe. The long absence of a woman in the room. She set her bag by the door to the small room and stood in the center of the kitchen and looked at what was there. A cast iron stove, 2 shelves of provisions, sparse but sorted. A table with 2 chairs and a 3rd chair against the wall that had a cracked leg propped with a folded piece of leather. She looked at the cracked leg for a moment. Then she turned and began to find where things were kept. The first meal she made was plain cornmeal porridge and salt pork and coffee. She found at the back of the upper shelf, ground 2 coarse but usable. She set the table for 2. She put the tin cups down. She did not wait for him. He came in from the barn with his hands still dusty and stopped inside the door a moment, reading the room the way she had read the town. Then he walked to the wash basin and cleaned up without being asked. He sat down. He ate without comment, which she understood to mean it was acceptable. She ate across from him and looked at the window above the dry sink where the light was going. Amber and the field beyond it was disappearing into dusk. He said the horses are in the north pasture until I have mended the near fence. She said how many. He said 4 working, 2 that are not. She did not ask why the 2 were not working. He did not explain. After supper, he took the lamp to the far end of the table and opened a ledger. She washed the tin cups and the pan and set them on the shelf, and then stood at the window a moment, looking at nothing in particular. The dark outside had thickened to the point where she could see her own reflection in the glass. She did not look at it long. She went to the small room. There was a rope bed with a ticking mattress and a single wool blanket folded at the foot. A wooden peg on the wall. A window with no curtain. She set her bag on the floor, sat on the edge of the mattress, and put her hands flat on her knees. Through the wall, she could hear the faint scratch of his pen on the ledger paper. Steady, deliberate. She listened to it until it stopped, and then she heard the creak of his chair, and the lamp went out, and the house was quiet. She lay down without undressing. She looked at the ceiling. The window let in a thin rectangle of stars. One of the horses made a sound somewhere out past the pasture fence. Not distress, just presence. The way animals announce themselves in the dark. She had not been in a house this quiet in some time. In the morning, she would need to assess the stores more carefully. The flour was low. She had seen the hinge on the smokehouse door hanging loose from the kitchen window when the light caught it right at dusk. The 3rd chair with its cracked leg could be repaired. If the wood had not split all the way through, she closed her eyes. She did not think about whether this would work. There was nothing useful in that direction. What was useful was the morning, and the morning was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. She was up before light. The kitchen was cold enough that she could see her breath, and she built the fire without rushing. Paper first, then the smaller sticks, then the split wood stacked beside the stove. She had done this 10,000 times. Her hands knew the order. While the stove came up, she went through the stores properly, pulling things forward, checking the backs of shelves. The flour was lower than low. 2 days, maybe 3, if she was careful. Salt adequate. Coffee beans enough for a week. 2 cured hams in the smokehouse, though the door would need to be fixed before anything in there was truly secure. She found a half sack of dried beans, pushed into a corner behind a broken crock, in a rusted tin of lard, with still enough in it to matter. She made a list on the back of an old envelope she found in the drawer nearest the window. She wrote in small, tight letters, the way she had learned to write when paper was scarce. He came down when the light was gray at the windows. He stopped when he saw the fire going the coffee on the envelope on the table with her notes on it. She said the flour needed replacing by end of week. She said the smokehouse hinge needed a pin. Not a new hinge, just a pin she could see from the gap, that the hinge itself was sound. She said the beans would need a long soak if they were having them tonight. He picked up the envelope. He read what she had written. He set it back down. He said he would go to town Thursday. She said Thursday was 3 days out, and asked if he had any flour put up in the barn stores. Sometimes it was kept with the grain to keep it from the mice. She had seen that done. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said there might be some. He had not checked in a while. She nodded and poured the coffee into 2 cups and set one on the counter near him, without looking at him directly. He took the cup. Outside, one of the horses moved in the paddock. A slow, heavy sound, hooves on packed earth. She went to the window and looked out at the pale shapes of them in the early light. 3 horses visible from here. 1 gray, 2 brown. The gray one had its head up, looking toward the house. She said the gray one, "Is it skittish, or is that just its way?" He came and stood slightly behind her and looked out the window. He said that one watches everything, always has. She looked at the horse a moment longer. Then she picked up her cup and turned back to the stove. The flour was in the barn 3rd shelf, behind the grain sacks wrapped in oilcloth and still good. She found it herself before he had pulled on his second boot. She brought it to the kitchen without mentioning it, and had biscuits cut and in the pan by the time he came in from the morning check. He saw the pan on the stove and did not say anything. He poured his own coffee this time and sat down at the table. She had found other things in the barn besides the flour. A cracked harness hanging on a nail that had been cracked long enough the leather had dried stiff around the break. A wheel leaning against the far wall with 2 spokes missing. A bucket with a rusted seam that would not hold water more than a few minutes before it wept along the bottom. She did not mention any of this, not yet. The biscuits came out of the pan, and she set them on the table and sat down across from him. Outside, the gray horse moved in the paddock again, that slow, deliberate sound. He ate. She watched him without watching him, the way a person does when they are thinking, and the other person happens to be in the room. After a moment, he said, "You found it easy enough?" She said the oilcloth was good quality. Whoever had put it up had known what they were doing. He did not answer. Something crossed his face brief, and then gone. She thought it might have been his wife, the one who had known where to put the flour, the one who was not here. She looked down at her biscuit. They finished the meal without much more said. He pushed back his chair and stood, and she began clearing the plates. When she reached across the table for his cup, he had not moved away yet, and her arm passed close to where he stood. He stepped back without making it a thing, just a small adjustment, and she took the cup and set it in the basin. He went outside. She watched from the window as he walked to the paddock fence, and stood there a moment, both hands on the top rail, looking at the horses. The gray one came to him. It pressed its nose against his shoulder, and he let it not moving, just standing with his hands on the rail, while the horse breathed against him. She looked away. The cracked harness bothered her. She had worked leather before. Her father had kept 2 horses and a mule, and there had been no one else to learn from. She knew she could cut the brake clean and splice it properly if she had the right strip of leather and an awl. She had seen an awl in the barn hanging on the same nail as the harness. She finished washing the cups. Then she dried her hands and went back out to the barn. The awl was where she had seen it. She lifted it off the nail and turned it in her hand. A good one old, but weighted right the handle smooth from years of use. She set it on the workbench and went to find the leather. There was a scrap box on the low shelf below the window, the kind that accumulates over years on any working farm. Offcuts, odd lengths, pieces too short to use and too good to throw away. She went through it slowly. Near the bottom, she found a strip of dark tan leather, firm but not cracked close enough in weight to the harness that the repair would hold without looking like a patch. She brought the harness down from the nail and laid it flat on the bench. The break was at the cheek piece, a clean split through the center, probably from one hard pull in cold weather. She could see where it had been worrying for a while before it finally gave. The fibers compressed along the edge, the surface worn pale. It had been left to get worse, not out of carelessness, she thought. Just the kind of thing a person alone lets slide, when there is always something more urgent. She knew that, too. She trimmed the broken ends with the knife she found beside the scrap box, cutting each side back to sound leather. Then she measured the strip, marked it with her thumbnail, and cut it to length. Her hands worked without hurry. She had done this enough times that she did not need to think about each step, only pay attention. She was partway through the skiving, thinning the splice ends so they would lay flat when she heard him come into the barn behind her. He stopped just inside the door. She did not turn around. She kept the blade moving in slow, deliberate strokes. "You do not have to do that," he said. "I know." A pause. She heard him take one step closer, then stop again, the way a careful man approaches something he is not sure of. "That strip from the box," he said, "near the bottom of it." "It is close enough," she said. Another pause. She set the blade down and held both pieces up to the light from the window to check the angle. Even. She set them back on the bench. "My grandfather kept horses," she said. Not explaining. Just offering the fact small and plain as a way of telling him she had not presumed. He learned what he knew from a Cornish miner in Pennsylvania, a man who had worked the land in England long before he ever saw a mine. That man used to say, "Rest the land before the land rests you." My grandfather applied it to everything he owned, the horses, the tools, the fields. Rest the thing before it breaks on you. He came the rest of the way to the bench and stood beside her. He looked at the cut ends at the strip at the angle of the skiving. He did not say anything for a moment. "That is better than I would have done it," he said finally. She did not answer. She picked up the awl and began to mark the stitch holes, and he stayed where he was, watching her hands move across the leather in the afternoon quiet. He stayed at the bench longer than he needed to. She was aware of it, the way a person is aware of warmth from a fire they are not looking at. She kept her hands moving. Mark, mark, mark along the line, even spacing. Her grandfather had taught her that uneven stitching pulled apart under load faster than any other failure. She had not forgotten it. He picked up the cut scrap from the edge of the bench, turned it in his hands, set it back down. "Where did you learn the skiving angle?" he asked. He did it freehand, she said. I watched until I understood why. He nodded once, as if that answered something he had not quite asked. She did not look up. Outside, one of the mares shifted in the paddock and called out once low and even. The afternoon had gone still the way afternoons did here, in the hour before the light changed. No wind. The dust settled. The whole valley holding its breath between the work of the day and the work of the evening. She threaded the needle. He moved to the window and looked out at the paddock. She could see him from the edge of her vision, the set of his shoulders, the way he stood with his weight slightly back, watching the horses, the way he always did not. Checking just being present to them. The bay mare, she said. She favors the left rear when the ground is soft. He was quiet for a moment. I noticed that. It is not the hoof. It is higher up. She compensates when she is tired. She began the first stitch, pulling the thread through clean. How long have you been watching her? He asked. Since the second week, she said. She felt more than heard the small shift in him. Not surprise exactly, but something adjusting. The way a person recalibrates when they realize they have been accompanied somewhere they thought they were alone. He did not say anything else for a while. She worked the seam slow and even the needle finding each hole she had marked. The leather was good. It would hold. The gray colt, she said. He's going to be trouble. He made a quiet sound, not quite a laugh, but close to it. The first one she had heard from him that had nothing in it but what it was. I know, he said. He watches everything. He is deciding whether the whole operation is worth his time. She pulled the last stitch through and held the strap up to check the tension along the seam. Even. She set it flat on the bench and pressed it with her palm to seat the stitches. Then she folded it and set it near the door where he would find it in the morning. He moved away from the window. She heard him cross the room behind her. Not toward the door, but toward the small work table where she had left the envelope with her notes from the morning. She did not turn. She heard him pull back the stool and sit, and then a long pause, and then the sound of the envelope being unfolded. She put the awl away and straightened the thread on the spool. You have more written here than the provisions, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, reading. The smokehouse hinge, he said. Just a pin, she said. The hinge itself is sound. Another pause. She heard him turn the envelope over, looking at the back where she had continued the list when the front ran out. The wheel in the barn, he said. The spokes. She said 2 new spokes one afternoon. The wood on the hub is still good. He set the envelope down. She could hear the small sound of it against the table. He did not speak right away. She waited. You have been taking stock, he said. Not an accusation. An observation. I notice things, she said. It is hard not to. He was quiet again. A longer quiet this time. She finished tidying the bench and turned around. He was sitting with the envelope in front of him and both hands flat on the table, looking at nothing in particular. His jaw was set the way a man's jaw sets when he is deciding something. She picked up her lamp from the bench. She said, the bay mare. I can show you what I am seeing if you want, tomorrow morning before the light gets high. He looked up at her. He did not answer immediately. The lamp flame pulled slightly with the movement of air from the open door, and then settled. All right, he said. She carried the lamp to the door and paused there with one hand on the frame. The day was almost gone now. The yard outside had gone to shadow, and the horses were moving slow along the fence line toward the gate. Judge, she thought, looking at the gray colt. That was the name that had been sitting in the back of her mind since the first morning. She had not said it out loud. She was not sure she intended to. She left the lamp on the shelf near the door, where he would have light to close up by. Then she went inside. That night, she lay on the rope bed and looked at the thin rectangle of stars the window let in, and thought about what she had found in the barn. Not the harness, not the wheel or the bucket. She had found those and logged them and would address them in their proper order. What she had found was this: a man who was careful and not careless, who kept his tools organized, even when they were broken, who wrapped his flour in oilcloth and coiled his chain over the same peg every time. A man whose wife had known where to put things and who had, without being aware of it, kept putting them in the same places because some habits outlast the person who made them. She understood that kind of faithfulness. She had her own version of it. The stone in her coat pocket. The small, tight handwriting she had learned when paper was scarce and had never unlearned. The way she assessed a room before she entered it. But there was something else she had found. Something she had not yet decided what to do with. She had found it late in the evening after supper when she went to look for a second candle in the drawer nearest the window. The drawer held what drawers in farm kitchens usually held: string and a broken pencil and a few old envelopes already used and some small coins. She had moved these aside, looking for the candle, and underneath them, folded into a precise rectangle, was a ledger page that had been torn out carefully, not ripped torn along a straight line. She had not meant to read it, but the numbers were face up, and she had already seen them before she looked away. $812. Due to the First Consolidated Bank of Reno, Nevada, by the 1st of April, 1879. She had stood in the kitchen for a long moment, holding the string she had moved aside, the candlelight making the numbers very clear. Then she had folded the page back along its crease, set it under the coins and the string and the broken pencil, exactly as she had found it, closed the drawer, and gone to the small room. That was 2 nights ago. She had not slept well since. It was not the amount, though. $812 was not a small amount. It was the date, 1st of April, 7 months from now. She had looked at the barn and the horses and the field to the east that had been cut one too many times without rest, and she had done the arithmetic in her head, and she knew what 7 months meant in this soil, on this land, with what was here. It meant there was still time, but only if things changed. And only if they changed soon. She turned on her side and looked at the wall. Through it, she could hear nothing now. The house was fully quiet. She put her hand in her coat pocket, which she had left folded on the chair beside the bed, and she touched the stone. Her grandfather had said, "Rest the thing before it breaks on you." He had said it about land and horses and tools. She thought he might have said it about people too, if anyone had asked him. She had not rested. She had kept going until the bank came and the going stopped. She had lost the farm in Missouri on a Wednesday afternoon in October, standing at the fence, watching the men from the bank walk the property line, and the wheat had been standing in the field, gold and ready, and not one stalk of it would be hers. She had thought standing at that fence that she was too old to begin again. She had thought that for a while. Long enough to move in with her sister. Long enough to sit in a chair in the mornings and not know what to do with her hands. Then she had seen the advertisement. Room and board. Working knowledge of horses preferred, but not essential. She had written back that same evening. She let go of the stone. The window let in its thin rectangle of stars, and the coyotes were starting somewhere far out on the flats, and the gray colt was quiet in the paddock and Beckett Voss was asleep on the other side of the wall, and in the morning she would show him what she had been watching in the bay. Mare, and he would understand that she saw things, that she paid attention, and then when the moment was right, when she knew what he was ready to hear, she would tell him what she had found in the kitchen drawer. Not yet, but soon. The land had time, but not much. She closed her eyes. Outside, the gray colt shifted once in the dark, and then settled, and the night held everything in its usual order, and the morning was already on its way. She was up before him again the next morning, and the morning after that, and by the end of the first week it had stopped being something either of them remarked on. She built the fire. She assessed what was there. She made the list and left it where he would find it. He read it without comment and did what needed doing, and they moved through the days the way two people move through a house. They are both still learning the shape of. Carefully, without crowding each other. The bay mare was named Cora. She learned that on the third day when he said the name without thinking, while they stood at the paddock fence in the early light. She had shown him what she had been watching, the way the mare shifted her weight when the ground near the water trough softened in the afternoon, the way she held herself differently after a long day than after a short one. He had watched without speaking, and then he had said, "Cora has always been the one I worry about," and she had understood from the way he said it that the mare had belonged to his wife first. She did not say anything about that. She just kept watching Cora and kept noting what she saw. The gray colt was another matter entirely. He had no name that Beckett used, at least not that she heard. The hands who sometimes came through called him the Morgan or the Gray One, or occasionally something less polite when he decided not to cooperate. But he was not difficult the way a mean animal is difficult. He was deliberate. He assessed everything and everyone who came into his range, and he made his own decisions about what was worth his attention. She respected that even when he made her work for it. By the end of the second week, he had started coming to the fence when she came out in the mornings. Not right away. He would stand back and watch her for a while first, making sure she was going to behave consistently, and then he would come forward and put his nose near her hand and breathe, and then go back to what he had been doing. She did not try to rush it. She just kept showing up at the same time in the same way and let him draw his own conclusions. On the 15th morning, she said quietly, without thinking about it, "Come on, then, Judge." And he came to her, without the usual waiting, and she heard a moment later the sound of Beckett's boots stopping on the path behind her. She did not turn around. She let the colt breathe against her palm. After a moment, she heard the boots start again past her toward the barn. He had not said anything. But that afternoon when he came in for the midday meal, he said the Gray One, and she said yes. And he said Judge, and she said yes again, and he poured his coffee and sat down, and that was the end of it. The colt had a name. They had agreed on it without negotiating, which was she was beginning to understand how most things between them got settled. The harder things took longer. She had been at the farm for 3 weeks when she made the proposal about the East Field, and she chose her moment the way she chose everything carefully after watching long enough to know what she was working with. It was an evening in late September, the light going low and gold across the table, and he had the ledger open in front of him, and she had her own notebook open beside her cup, and she said the East Field has been cut too many times without rest. He did not look up from the ledger. "I know," he said. She said one season of rest and a cover crop, turned under in the spring, would restore what it has lost. She said she had seen it done on land that looked worse than this. Her grandfather had learned it from a Cornish miner who had worked the land in England long before he ever came to Pennsylvania. And the man had said the old farmers of Cornwall had done it that way for generations beyond counting, resting each field in rotation so the land could give back what the crops had taken. She said the yield in the second year after resting would more than cover the loss of one growing season. He was quiet for a long time. His pen had stopped moving. "I cannot leave that field empty," he said. "Not this year." She said, "I understand that, but I want you to think about what it will give you in the year after, against what it will give you if you cut it again this spring." He looked up at her then. It was not an unfriendly look. It was the look of a man who had been carrying a calculation in his head for a long time and had just heard someone name the number he kept coming up short on. "I will think about it," he said. She nodded and looked back at her notebook. She had not expected him to agree that night. She did not need him to. She just needed the idea to be in the room, sitting there the way things sat, when you left them out long enough for a person to get used to looking at them. She went back to her numbers. He went back to his. Outside, Judge moved along the fence line in the dark, and somewhere past the cottonwoods, an owl called once and then was quiet. The next morning, Floyd Pine arrived. She did not know who he was when the buggy came up the track. She was in the yard with the mending basket sitting on the porch steps in the October light, working through a pile of shirts that had been accumulating since before she arrived. She watched the buggy come and noted that it was a town vehicle too clean for a working farm, the horse well fed and evenly matched to the harness in a way that suggested money spent on appearance. The man who got down was somewhere in his mid-50s, dressed in a dark coat, his boots polished in a way that made no sense for a dirt track. He looked at the yard the way a man looks at something he is pricing. Then he looked at her. His expression did not change exactly, but something in it shifted a very small recalibration, the kind that happens when a person sees something unexpected and decides it is beneath their notice. "Where is Voss?" he said. Not asked. Said. She set the mending in her lap. "He is in the north pasture," she said. "He should be back within the hour." Pine looked around the yard again. Then he looked at her in the particular way some men look at older women, who are sitting where they did not expect to find anyone, as though the presence itself required explanation. "What is your business here?" he said. She said, "I manage the household." He made a small sound that was not quite a laugh and walked past her up the steps and tried the door. It was unlocked. He went inside. She sat on the steps and kept mending. She heard him moving through the kitchen, heard the sound of the drawer near the window opening and closing, heard what was probably the ledger being lifted from the table and set back down. She kept her needle moving through the cloth. Her hands did not shake. She was 63 years old, and she had met men like Floyd Pine before, and she had learned that the best thing to do with them was exactly what she was doing, which was to let them feel they had taken the measure of the room and found nothing of interest because men who felt that way got careless. Beckett came back from the north pasture 20 minutes later. She heard his horse before she saw him, and she saw him register the town buggy before he had fully come through the gate. He did not hurry. He rode to the barn, put the horse up, and came to the porch where she was sitting. "Pine is inside," she said. "How long?" 20 minutes or so. He looked at the door. Then he looked at her in the way he had started to look at her when he wanted to ask something without asking it directly. She said he went through the drawer in the kitchen. Beckett said nothing. He went inside. She kept her needle moving. The voices inside were low. She could not make out the words, only the shape of them. Pine's voice with a smooth, flat authority in it. Beckett's shorter and more careful. It went on for perhaps half an hour. Then the door opened and they came out together, and Pine walked down the steps past her without looking at her, and Beckett stood at the top of the steps and watched Pine get into his buggy. Pine gathered his reins. He looked up at Beckett. I will expect to hear from you before the 1st of November, he said. Then he looked at her, sitting on the step with her mending, and for just a moment, something moved across his face that she recognized as the decision a man makes when he has assessed something and found it easier to dismiss than to understand. I do not know what you think a woman that age is going to do for you, Vosspine said, but I hope she at least knows how to cook. The buggy moved off down the track. She listened to the wheels on the dry dirt until the sound was gone. Beckett had not moved from the top of the steps. She could feel him standing there, the particular stillness of a man who is deciding what to do with his anger. She kept her needle moving, one stitch, then the next. He said, I should have told you. She said the ledger page in the kitchen drawer, $812 due in April. A pause. You found it, he said. First week, she said. Another pause longer. She heard him sit down on the bench along the rail above her. The old wood shifted under his weight. Pine wants it settled before April now, he said. He says the bank has concerns about the trajectory of the operation. She tied off the thread and folded the shirt and picked up the next one. What did you tell him? She said. I told him the fall would be better than last year. She said, will it be? He was quiet for a moment. The north field should come in close to what I projected. The east field I am not sure of. She heard what he did not say in that. He had cut the east field again this spring. She already knew that. She set the shirt in her lap and looked out at the yard. Judge was at the fence watching the road, where Pine's buggy had gone, his head up and his ears forward, taking his own measure of what had just left. She said, I have been keeping my own numbers. I would like to show them to you. He did not answer right away. She waited. All right, he said. That evening, she put her notebook on the table between them. She had been working on it since the second day, filling in what she observed against what she calculated, building the picture field, by field animal, expense by expense. She had projected 3 years, which she knew was longer than he was used to thinking, because when you are holding something together alone, you tend to think in seasons, not years. But the debt required years. And so she had made herself think in them. He read through it slowly. She sat across from him and drank her coffee and did not explain anything unless he asked. He asked twice. Once about the east field projection, which she explained, and once about the horse valuation she had estimated for the Morgan colts if they were brought to full condition, which she also explained. He did not say much. He turned pages. He went back to earlier pages and compared them to later ones. When he was done, he set the notebook on the table and looked at it for a moment. Then he said, the east field. What you said before about resting it. Yes, she said. He said if we rest it this coming season and put the cover crop in and turn it under in March. She said April at the latest, before the ground gets dry. He was quiet. She could see him doing the arithmetic in his own head, the short version that he had always used against the longer version she had laid out in front of him, and she could see the moment when the longer version won. Show me what you need for the cover crop, he said, what it costs, what we have to buy, and what we can manage from what is here. She turned to the page where she had already written it down. He looked at the page for a long time. She watched his face and saw the thing she had been waiting to see, which was not agreement exactly. Not yet, but the small shift that happens when a man stops defending the wall he has built around a problem and starts looking at the problem itself. He said, I will need to sell 2 of the colts before winter to cover the seed cost. She said the 2 that are not working. Yes. I thought that as well. He looked at her. She said they are not working because they have not been worked. They could be worth considerably more than what you would get for them now if you brought them along another 2 months. But if you need the money before winter, I understand that. He was quiet for a long time after that. She finished her coffee. I will think about the colts, he said. She nodded and collected her notebook and stood up. She said the East Field, whatever you decide about the colts. That part should not wait. He said, I know. She went to the small room. Through the wall, she heard him stay at the table for a long time. The occasional sound of the ledger opening a page, turning the small friction of a man working through numbers he had known for a long time and was only now beginning to see differently. She lay down and looked at the ceiling and thought about Floyd Pine's voice on the porch steps and did not let herself feel the thing she had almost felt when he said what he said, because that thing was not useful. What was useful was the East Field and the cover crop and the 2 colts and the 7 months that remained before April. She put her hand on the coat draped over the chair and touched the stone once through the cloth. Then she let go and closed her eyes. In the first week of October, they started on the East Field together. Beckett had decided about the colts, and she had not pushed him. And what he decided was that she was right about the 2 months, so they would wait. They would find another way to cover the seed cost. She had suggested 3 things, and he had picked the one she would have picked, which was selling the surplus hay from the North Field now instead of holding it through winter. It was a seller's market in October. By December, it would not be. She did not say that she had known he would choose that option. She just helped him load the wagon. The East Field work was not glamorous. It was the kind of work that looks like nothing from a distance and costs everything up close. Rerouting the drainage from the small creek that came down off the North Ridge meant digging by hand in soil that had compacted over years of misuse, breaking through the crust layer by layer, laying the channel stones by eye, because there was no level and no blueprint. Only the understanding of where water wanted to go when you gave it the chance. She dug alongside him. He had not asked her to. She had simply appeared at the field with a shovel the first morning, and he had looked at her for a moment and then gone back to what he was doing. Her hands blistered and then toughened. Her back ached at the end of each day, with a deep, specific ache that she recognized from her years in Missouri, the ache of real work, the kind that meant something was actually changing. She did not complain about it. She had not come here to complain. Clement Shaw came by at the end of the second week. He was the neighbor to the north, a big, slow-moving man in his late 60s, with a face weathered to the color of the fence posts and a way of stopping his wagon at the gate and waiting to be noticed rather than coming in uninvited. Beckett went to the gate, and they talked for a few minutes, and then Shaw drove off, and Beckett came back to the field. What did he want? She asked, not looking up from the channel she was clearing. He heard we were resting the East Field, Beckett said. Wanted to know if I had gone soft in the head. She kept working. What did you tell him? I told him it was the woman's idea, Beckett said. She looked up at that. He was not looking at her. He was looking at the channel she had been clearing, assessing the angle of it. And what did he say, she asked. He said that explained it, Beckett said. She heard something in his voice that was not quite one thing. It was in the territory between embarrassment and something harder to name. She looked back at the ground and started clearing again. After a moment, he said, for what it is worth. I did not say it to distance myself from the decision. She said, I know why you said it. He looked at her. Because it is true, she said. And because it is easier for Shaw to dismiss it if it comes from me. If it comes from you, he will want to argue about it. A pause. Beckett said that is a generous way to read it. She said, I am not always generous. I am just practical. He made the sound that was almost a laugh, and she looked at the channel and kept her face even. But something in her chest did a small, quiet thing that she decided not to examine too closely. The trouble with the town came in late October. She had known it was coming, in the general way that you know a storm is coming, when you have lived outdoors long enough. The looks when Beckett drove her to town for supplies. The conversations that stopped and started differently when they walked into the general store together. The particular quality of the silence in Harlan Flats when an arrangement people did not understand had been running long enough for people to start having opinions about it. Gideon Marsh ran the general store. He was a compact man in his 40s, with the manner of someone who had appointed himself the moral center of a small community, and had been doing the job long enough to believe he was qualified for it. She was in the store on a Thursday in late October, picking up the week's supplies from the list she had given Beckett the day before, when Marsh said behind the counter, in a voice pitched to Carrie, that he had heard Voss was letting an old woman run his operation now. She was reading the label on a tin of baking powder. She set it in the basket. He said it to his assistant, a boy of about 16, who looked uncomfortable and did not respond. She moved to the next shelf. Marsh said, "Suppose a man gets desperate enough, he will take advice from anyone." She put a second tin of coffee on top of the baking powder. She did not look at him. She carried the basket to the counter and set it down and looked at the list in her hand. "I will also need a pound of salt and whatever you have in the way of harness thread," she said. "Heavy gauge if you have it." Marsh looked at her for a moment. He looked at the basket. He said Voss is behind on his account. She said, "I am aware of that. Put today's purchase on it, and I will tell him when I get back." He said, "I am not sure I can keep extending credit to an operation that is making the decisions it appears to be making." She looked at him then. She looked at him in the particular way she had learned to look at men who were trying to make her feel small, which was to look at them as though she were reading a document. She found mildly interesting, but not surprising. She said, "Mr. Marsh, the east field at the Voss farm will yield close to double what it yielded last year by the time we bring it in next fall. The drainage work is already done. The cover crop will go in next month. The horse stock is in better condition than it has been in 3 years, and I can show you the weights if that would help you decide about the credit." She said it quietly. Not a performance, just the facts in their proper order. Marsh said nothing. She said, "But if you would prefer not to extend it, I understand that too." She picked up the basket. "I will find what we need elsewhere." She walked to the door. Behind her, she heard Marsh say, "Leave the basket." He said it roughly the way a man speaks when he has lost a small argument and has not yet worked out how. She set the basket back on the counter. She said the salt and the harness thread. He got them without looking at her. She walked back to the wagon where Beckett was waiting outside the livery. He saw her face before she said anything. She did not tell him everything. She told him enough. He went into the store. She did not follow him. She sat on the wagon bench and straightened the purchases in the basket and listened to the sounds of the town around her and did not try to imagine what was being said inside. He came out 15 minutes later. He climbed up beside her and gathered the reins. He said, "I settled the account." She said, "With what?" He said, "I had some put by, for the colts." She looked at him. He was looking at the road ahead. She said, "Beckett." He said, "I know." He clicked to the horses and they moved off down the street. Outside of town, when the road opened up and there was no one to see them, he said he will not refuse us credit again. She looked at the road and did not say what she was thinking, which was that the money for the colts had been the last cushion between them and the debt, and now it was gone, and the margin they had left was thinner than the one she had started calculating against 3 weeks ago. She said we will need to move up the timeline on the colts. Before December, not after. He said, I know that. She said I can have them ready in 6 weeks if we start now. He said, all right. They drove home in the particular silence of two people who have both understood something at the same time and have chosen to face forward. Cora went down on a Thursday night in November. Opal had been watching her for 2 weeks, tracking the progression of what she had first noticed as a subtle stiffening in the left shoulder, the kind of thing that was easy to miss if you were not paying attention to the whole animal. She had mentioned it to Beckett once briefly, and he had said he would watch her, and she knew he was watching, but she also knew that what she was seeing was moving faster than either of them had expected. She was up at midnight to check on the water in the barn, which sometimes froze near the top of the trough on cold nights. And she found Cora down in her stall, not thrashing just down the way a horse goes down, when something has shifted that cannot be easily shifted back. She did not go back to the house for Beckett. She went into the stall. What happened in the next 4 hours was mostly about steadiness. Keeping her own hands steady so the mare did not panic. Keeping her voice at the same pitch and pace it always was, because animals know when you are frightened, and the knowing frightens them further. She had learned this from her father, and she had confirmed it over 50 years of working with animals, that the most important thing you could offer a creature in distress was the sense that the person beside it was not distressed. She was frightened. She kept it somewhere behind her sternum and did not let it reach her hands. Beckett found her there when he came out for the early morning check. She heard him stop at the stall door. She did not look up. How long, he said. Since midnight, she said. She is moving better than she was at 2. I think the worst of it has passed. He came into the stall and crouched down on the other side of the mare. She could see his face in the lamplight the way it held very still. He put his hand on Cora's neck and kept it there. They stayed like that for a while, the 3 of them, the mare breathing steadily between them, the barn quiet around them. The other horses shifted occasionally, but did not make much noise. Judge was at the far end of his section. She could hear him moving slowly, also attending in his own way. When the light started coming through the high gap above the loft, Cora put her head up and then got her legs under her. Beckett helped her from one side, Opal from the other. The mare stood. She was weak, and she would need watching for several days, but she stood. Beckett straightened up. His face in the growing light was something she had not seen before. Not open exactly, but the doors were closer to open than she had seen them. He said you were watching her. She said I have been watching her since October. He nodded slowly. He looked at Cora, then at her. He said I should have asked you sooner what you were seeing. She said you asked when you were ready to. He looked at the floor of the stall. He said my wife used to say something like that. She did not answer. She picked up the lamp and adjusted the wick. He said she would have liked you. He said it quietly as a fact, not a sentiment. She said I think I would have liked her. The flower was in the right place. He made the sound that was close to a laugh, but this time it went further than it usually did, and she heard the edge of something real in it, something that had been stored a long time and was only now finding its way out. She carried the lamp out of the stall and hung it on the hook by the barn door. Outside, the light was coming up, pale and thin over the east field, and she could see the cover crop coming in a faint greenish cast to the dark soil that you could only see in this early slanted light if you knew what you were looking for. She stood in the barn door and looked at it. Behind her, she heard Beckett come out of Cora's stall and walk up beside her. He stood where he always stood, half a step back and to her left. It is coming in, he said. She said faster than I expected. The drainage work helped. The soil is holding the moisture better. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "When Pine comes back in December." She had been thinking about December since the morning she found the ledger page. She said, "I know. We will not have the full numbers yet, but we will have enough to show him the direction." He said he does not respond well to direction. He responds to what is already there. She said, "Then we will show him what is already there. And we will show him what the numbers say about where it is going." He said he will not believe numbers from you. She said, "Then bring me as the woman who manages the household accounts, and let me stand next to the numbers while he reads them." A pause. He said, "That is a considerable risk." She said the alternative is letting him make the decision in his office in Reno, with no information except what he already thinks. Beckett was quiet. Judge had moved up to the fence near the barn and was looking at them in the early light, ears forward, taking his own measure of the morning, the way he always did. Then on December the 3rd, the first hard frost came, and it came 10 days earlier than anyone in Harlan Flats had seen in 15 years. She woke to it at 3 a.m, not because of a sound, but because of the quality of the silence, the particular pressure of very cold air coming under the door of the small room. She lay still for 3 seconds, and then she got up. She did not light a lamp. She put on every layer she had and went out through the kitchen and out the back door into the cold, and the cold was serious. The kind that means business. The kind that can take a cover crop that has been coming in for 6 weeks and kill it to the root in a single night. She was already at the barn for the tools before she had fully decided what she was going to do, but her body had already decided that she was going to do what could be done with what was here, which was straw mulch from the barn floor and the 2 canvas tarps folded in the corner of the loft, and whatever she could manage to lay across the most vulnerable section of the east field before the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. She was halfway across the yard with the first tarp when she heard the barn door behind her. She did not stop. She heard him catch up to her, heard him take the other end of the tarp without asking, and then they were moving together across the dark field toward the eastern edge, where the cover crop was thinnest and most exposed, and the frost was already white on the ground where the moonlight caught it, and her breath was coming in hard, cold pulls that she felt in her chest, and she did not slow down. They worked without speaking. She pointed, he moved. He lifted, she secured. They went back for the straw and spread it in the sections they could not cover with canvas, working by moonlight and by the knowledge of the field that they had both built over the preceding weeks. She knew where the drainage channel ran and stayed clear of it. He knew where the frost pocket formed at the low end, and they doubled the straw there. It took 3 hours. When they stopped, it was not because they were done exactly, but because they had done what was possible with what they had, and the sky was beginning to lighten in the east, and they were both standing in the middle of a field covered in straw dust and a frost breathing hard. She looked at what they had covered. Then she looked at what they had not been able to reach. She said, "The north corner." He said, I know. She said, "If the temperature holds above 15, it may be all right." He said, "It usually does not hold above 15 when it starts like this." She looked at the north corner for a long moment. Then she looked at the sky, which was the particular dark blue of very early morning, just before it starts to lighten. And she thought about the numbers in her notebook and the $812 and Floyd Pine's voice on the porch steps, and she thought about the wheat standing in the Missouri field on the Wednesday afternoon, when she lost everything gold and ready, and not hers. She put her hand in her coat pocket and closed it around the stone. Beckett stood beside her, not speaking, just there. After a moment, she said, "We will know by morning what we have left." He said, "Yes." She took her hand out of her pocket. She said, "Then let us go in." They walked back across the field together. The frost crunched under their boots. The sky was lightening now, pale and cold, and very clear, and Judge was at the paddock fence watching them return across the field, standing still and patient in the cold dark. She did not look at the north corner again. In the kitchen, she built the fire without rushing, and he stood at the window looking out at the field, while the stove came up and neither of them said anything for a long time. She put the coffee on. She set 2 cups on the table. She sat down and put her hands flat on the table and looked at them. He turned from the window and sat across from her. The letter from Pine was still on the table where Beckett had set it 4 days ago. She had not moved it. He had not moved it. She said the field will tell us what we have in the morning. Whatever it tells us, we go to Reno. He looked at the letter. He looked at her. She said we do not go to his office. We bring him here. We let him stand on that field and see what it is doing, and decide with his own eyes what he is looking at. He said, Pine does not come to farms. She said then we give him a reason to. He was quiet. She said Beckett. He makes his decisions from a distance, because distance lets him see what he has already decided to see. If we put him on that field, he has to see what is actually there. A long pause. He said, and if what is actually there is not enough. She looked at him steadily. She said then, at least we will know we showed him the truth. The coffee was ready. She poured it into both cups and set his in front of him. Outside, the sky had gone from dark blue to pale gray, and the frost was still on the ground, and the east field lay quiet under its covering of canvas and straw holding what they had given it. She picked up her cup. Whatever the morning showed, they would face it. That was all there was. The morning came in pale and still, the kind of stillness that follows a hard freeze, when the air has spent itself, and what is left is very cold and very clear. She was out before full light. She did not wait for him. She walked the east field alone in the early gray, moving from the canvas sections to the straw sections and back, crouching down in places to look at the cover crop, close pulling back a corner of canvas here and there to see what was underneath. What she found was not as bad as it could have been. The sections they had covered held. The north corner, the one they had not reached, showed damage along the outermost row, the stems blackened at the soil line, in the way that meant those plants were done. But it was 1 row, maybe 2. The rest of the corner had been sheltered somewhat by the drainage channel, which had held warmth the way she had hoped it might when she laid it out in October. She stood at the north corner for a long time, looking at the blackened row doing the arithmetic. She heard him come up behind her. She did not turn around. She said we lost the outer edge, maybe 1/10 of the planting. He was quiet for a moment. She heard him crouch down beside her, heard the sound of him pulling back a handful of straw to look at what was underneath. The rest held, he said. It was not a question. The rest held, she said. He stood back up. She could feel him looking at the field, doing his own version of the arithmetic. The light was coming up now, catching the frost on the parts of the field they had not covered, turning them silver, making the covered sections look darker and richer by comparison. It is enough, he said, if the spring comes in normally. She said it will be enough even if the spring is late. The drainage work will carry it through a late spring, better than this field has managed in years. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, I will write to Pine today. She said, tell him we want him to come here, not to Reno, here. A pause. He said, Pine does not come to farms. She said, write to him anyway. Tell him you want him to see the operation before you discuss terms. Tell him you have made changes and you want him to evaluate them in person. Give him the sense that he is being asked to exercise his judgment, not to grant a favor. Another pause. She heard him exhale slowly in the cold air. He said, "You know how to talk to men like Pine." She said, "I know how men like Pine think. There is a difference." He did not answer that. She turned and walked back toward the barn to start the morning work, and after a moment, she heard him follow. The letter went out that afternoon. Pine's reply came 6 days later. He would come on the 17th of December. He would require a full accounting of the operation, all ledgers and records available for review. He did not commit to anything in writing, which was itself a kind of commitment, because men like Pine did not travel 7 miles out of Reno in December unless they intended to make a decision when they got there. She spent the days between the letter and the visit by doing 2 things simultaneously. The first was the field work, which did not stop because a banker was coming. The cover crop needed attention after the frost, specific sections where the straw had shifted and needed redistribution, the drainage channel, which had partially silted at the south end, and needed to be cleared before the next hard rain came through. She and Beckett worked the field in the mornings and the barn in the afternoons, and she was tired in the evenings in the clean, specific way that came from having done what needed doing. The second thing she did was the numbers. She went through her notebook line by line and built a document that was not a notebook, that was a proper accounting in the format. She understood from her years managing the books on her father's farm and then her own. Columns, dates, verifiable entries that corresponded to things a man could walk out and look at with his own eyes. She cross-referenced it against Beckett's ledger, which he gave her without being asked, setting it on the table beside her coffee cup one evening and going out to check the horses and leaving her to it. She worked on the document for 4 evenings. When she was done, it was 15 pages written, in the small, tight hand she had never unlearned, and it told a story that she believed was true and that she believed could be verified by anyone willing to look. She gave it to Beckett the night before Pine arrived. He read it at the table while she cleaned up from supper, and he did not speak for a long time, and when he was done, he closed it and looked at the cover of it, and then looked up at her. He said, "You built this from what you observed." She said, "From what I observed and what I measured and what I know about how this kind of soil responds to this kind of treatment. The projections are conservative. I used the lower range of what I would expect." He said, "Pine will push on the projections." She said, "Let him push. The soil is out there. The drainage channel is out there. The cover crop is out there. He can push on numbers all he wants, but he cannot argue with what is growing in the ground." Beckett looked at the document again. Then he looked at her with the expression she had come to know over these months, the one that was not quite one thing that was in the territory between respect and something that had no efficient name. He said, "I want you in the room when he comes." She said, "I intended to be." Pine arrived at 10:30 on the 17th, in the same clean buggy as before, the same polished boots, the same coat. He came up the porch steps and stopped when he saw her standing in the kitchen doorway, and the same small recalibration happened in his face, as the first time the flicker of a man adjusting to something he had not expected to find in the same place twice. Beckett was behind her. He said, "Mr. Pine, come in." They sat at the kitchen table. Beckett put the ledger on the table and set the document she had made beside it. Pine looked at the document, and then at her, and then at Beckett. He said, "Is this hers?" Beckett said, "It is the farm's accounting." She prepared it. Pine picked it up. She watched him read. She had learned over many years that you could tell a great deal about a man by the way he read a document he had not expected to be competent. Some men read faster than normal skimming, looking for the flaw they were certain was there. Some men put it down quickly and said something dismissive. Pine read slowly. She noted that. He was looking for something specific. He found what he was looking for on the 4th page, which was the east field projections. He set the document down and looked at her directly for the first time. He said, "These yield numbers for next fall. What are they based on?" She said, "Soil composition, drainage improvement, the cover crop currently in the ground, and the historical yield records from this field going back to the original planting, which are in the back of Mr. Voss's ledger." Pine looked at Beckett. Beckett nodded once toward the ledger. Pine opened it, found the historical records, and spent several minutes with them. She waited. She kept her hands still on the table. She did not look at Beckett. Pine said, "Your cover crop took frost damage in early December." She said, "The outer edge of the north section, approximately 1/10 of the planting." He said, "That affects your projection." She said, "I have accounted for it." The projection on page 4 uses the post-frost planting estimate, not the original. You will see the adjustment in the footnote at the bottom of the column. He looked at page 4 again. She had put the footnote there on the 3rd evening of working on the document after she had walked the field one more time and remeasured the damaged section and recalculated with the actual numbers rather than the hoped-for ones. She had wanted the document to be the kind of thing that held up when pushed, not the kind that fell apart at the first hard question. Pine read the footnote. He read it again. Then he said, "I want to see the field." She said, "Of course." She had been waiting for him to say that. They walked out together, the 3 of them. Pine in his polished boots, picking his way across the yard, with the careful steps of a man. Unused to unpaved ground, Beckett on his left, her on his right. Judge came to the paddock fence as they passed, and Pine glanced at him, and she saw the quick professional assessment in his eyes. The same eyes that had looked at her on the porch steps and found her beneath notice. He looked at Judge differently, the way he looked at things he assigned a value to. She said, "That is the Morgan colt. He will be ready for sale in the spring. I have estimated his value at the bottom of page 12 based on comparable sales in the Reno market in the last 18 months. Pine looked at Judge for another moment. Then he looked at her. He said, "You pulled those comparable sales from where?" She said, "From the livestock reports in the Nevada State Journal. The copies are in the general store in town. I read them when we went in for supplies." A pause. He said, "You read the livestock reports." She said, "I read whatever is available." Something shifted in Pine's expression. It was not warmth. Men like Floyd Pine did not warm to things easily, and she did not require him to. What shifted was the quality of his attention, the angle of it. He was looking at her now the way he looked at the ledger, as a document that might contain something worth reading. They came to the east field. She led him to the section that had come through the frost, best the central portion, where the cover crop was thick and green-gray against the dark soil. She showed him the drainage channel. She showed him the difference in soil color between the rested section and the corner of the north field that had been cut again last spring without rest. The pale, exhausted look of one against the darker, more alive look of the other. She did not use many words. She let him look. He walked the section for a while without speaking. She and Beckett stood at the edge and watched him. At one point, Pine crouched down and put his hand in the soil and lifted a handful and looked at it, and she watched his face as he did it, and she saw in his face something she recognized from her own experience of looking at land that was doing what you asked it to do. It was not pleasure exactly. It was the involuntary acknowledgement of a fact. He stood up and brushed the soil from his hands. He was quiet for a long moment. The cold air moved around them, and the frost that was still on the grass in the low places caught the thin December light, and somewhere past the cottonwoods, A meadowlark called once, which was unusual for December, and she took note of it without letting her expression change. Pine said, "I will extend the note to June." She said we would need until September. The harvest will not be in until late August at the earliest. He looked at her. He said, "July." She said, "Mr. Pine, the crop does not know about July. It will be ready when it is ready, and that will be August at the earliest, and more likely the first week of September. If you extend to July, and we miss the payment by 6 weeks because the harvest is not yet in you, lose the good faith of an operation that is demonstrably recovering. If you extend to October, you protect your investment and allow the operation to pay you in full from a completed harvest." A silence. He said, "September 15th. She said, "That is acceptable." He looked at Beckett, who had not spoken in some time. Beckett said, "That is acceptable." Pine looked at the field one more time. He looked at his soil-dusted hand, then found his handkerchief and cleaned it carefully. He said, "I will have the revised agreement drawn up in Reno. You will receive it before Christmas." He walked back toward the house. Beckett fell into step beside him. She stayed at the edge of the field for a moment longer. The cover crop moved very slightly in the cold air, a barely perceptible ripple across the surface of the planting, the way a field moves when it is alive and the wind is low. She stood and watched it, and let herself feel, for just a moment, the thing she had been keeping behind her sternum since December 3rd. Not triumph. Something quieter than that. The knowledge that the ground was doing what she had asked it to do, and that she had asked the right thing. Then she turned and walked back to the house. The agreement came before Christmas, as Pine had said it would. Beckett signed it at the kitchen table on a Tuesday evening, and she witnessed it, and they did not celebrate exactly. But she made a better supper than usual that night, a proper roast with the last of the root vegetables from the cellar, and he noticed and he ate without comment, which by now she understood to mean he was pleased. Winter settled in around them after that, and the work changed its character. The urgent things had been done. What remained was the maintenance of what they had built, the daily tending of the animals and the equipment and the cover crop through the cold months, the careful management of what they had against what they would need come spring. She found she liked winter on this farm, in a way she had not expected. The pace of it, the particular quality of the mornings when the frost was on the ground and the light was very clear, and the horses were moving in the paddock, and the work ahead was known and manageable. She had not had many winters like that in recent years. Most of her winters for a long time had been winters of uncertainty, winters of calculation, winters of doing the arithmetic in her head in the dark and not liking what she found. This winter was different. The arithmetic was moving in a direction she could follow. That was the difference. Not that the worry was gone, that the worry had a shape she could work with. January came and went. February came in hard and went out mild, which was favorable for the cover crop. She watched it through the cold months with the attention she gave everything, noting how it responded to each shift in temperature, adjusting her spring planting schedule in the notebook when what she saw warranted it. Beckett watched her watch it. She knew he did. She was aware of his awareness of her the way she was aware of most things on this farm, not because she was looking for it, but because she paid attention to what was there. In February, he fixed the cracked leg on the third kitchen chair without mentioning. He was going to do it. She noticed when she came in from the barn one morning and found the chair move slightly from its usual position against the wall. The leather brace removed the leg mended properly with a wood splice, and a small iron bracket fitted flush so it did not show. She set the chair back in its place and sat in it, and it held solid and level. She did not mention it either. But that evening, she put a second lamp on the table without being asked, and the light was better for both of them, and she saw him notice that too. There were things they were doing for each other that had no name and required none. In March, she wrote to her sister in Missouri. She said the work was real, and the land was responding, and the man she worked for was a good man, which was as much as she intended to say on that subject in a letter. She said she would not be returning to Missouri in the spring, as she had vaguely suggested she might when she left. She said she was where she was needed, which was true, and also where she wanted to be, which was truer still. She folded the letter and sealed it and gave it to Beckett when he went to town without explaining what was in it. He did not ask. April came, and the cover crop went under. Exactly as she had planned, turned into the soil in the first week before it dried out, and the east field sat dark and quiet, and full of everything it had been gathering since September. She stood at the edge of it the morning after the turning, and put her hand in the soil, and it was warm and loose and alive in a way that this field had not been in years. She could feel it. 63 years of working with land taught you to feel what the soil was doing. Underneath your hands, and this soil was telling her what she had asked it to tell her. She stayed there longer than she had intended. Beckett came and stood beside her. He put his own hand in the soil and held it there for a moment. He said, "It is different." She said, "It has been waiting to be different. It just needed the chance." He looked at the field for a long time. The morning was warm for April, a real warmth, and the sky was very blue, and the cottonwoods at the edge of the property had gone the bright new green of early spring, and Judge was in the paddock moving with his usual deliberate energy, and the whole farm had the feeling of a thing that had come through something and was now on the other side of it. She took her hand out of the soil and stood up. She brushed the earth from her palm. She said we should get the planting in by the end of the week if the weather holds. He said it will hold. She looked at him. He said it with the certainty of someone who knew this land well enough to read it. And she trusted that knowledge the way she trusted her own different knowledge. And together those two kinds of knowing had brought them here to this field, on this morning with the soil warm under their hands. They planted the east field in the last week of April. It took 3 days, long days that started before light and ended after dark. And at the end of the third day, she sat on the porch steps with her boots still on and her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, and she looked out at the dark field and felt the particular satisfaction of a thing completed that had required everything to complete. He sat on the bench along the rail above her, his elbows on his knees, looking at the same dark field. He said, 3 days ago, I would not have believed we could do it in 3. She said we had good weather and we knew what we were doing. He said, you knew what you were doing. I was following instructions. She said you were not following instructions. You were making decisions at the same time I was. That is different. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have not worked alongside someone who made decisions at the same time in a long time. She looked at her coffee. She said, neither have I. The silence that followed was the kind she had come to know on this farm, the kind that had weight and direction that carried something, without naming it. She did not try to name it. She just let it sit between them in the warm April evening and looked at the dark field and drank her coffee. After a while, he said, Opal. It was the first time he had used her name without a title in front of it. Not Mrs. Caswell, which is what he had called her when he needed to refer to her directly, and not the more common avoidance of her name entirely, which had been most of their early conversation. He said her name, and then he stopped. She waited. He said, I put the advertisement in the paper because the farm needed managing. That was the whole of it when I wrote it. She said, I know. He said it is not the whole of it now. She looked at the field. She could not see it in the dark, but she knew exactly what was there. The long rows of seed they had put in over 3 days, the soil that was ready for them, the drainage that would carry them through whatever June brought. She had built that. He had let her build it, and then he had built it with her. She said, I know that too. He said, I am not asking you to decide anything tonight. She said, I am not deciding anything tonight. But I am not deciding either. A pause. She heard him make the sound that had started as something close to a laugh and had become over these months something closer to what it actually was, which was the sound of a man who had been accompanied. Somewhere he thought he was going alone and found he did not mind. She finished her coffee. She stood up. She said the bay section in the north field is going to need attention in the morning. The soil there runs drier than the rest, and if we do not get irrigation on it before the week is out, we will lose the moisture the planting needs. He said, I know. I was thinking about rerouting the North Channel. She said I was thinking the same thing. I sketched it in the notebook if you want to look at it tonight. He said I will look at it in the morning. She said, suit yourself. And she went inside. She was smiling quietly where he could not see it. The spring moved through May and into June, and the east field came up the way she had known it would, the seedlings strong and evenly spaced. The rows straight, the soil holding its moisture better than any field on the property had in recent memory. She measured the growth every week and wrote it in the notebook, and the numbers told the story she had predicted they would tell, which was the story of land that had been given the chance to rest, and was now doing what land does when you treat it the way it needs to be treated. Clement Shaw came by in May. He stopped his wagon at the gate the way he always did, and waited, and Beckett went out and they talked for a while, and then Beckett came back and stood in the barn door where she was working on a piece of tack and said, Shaw wants to know if you would look at his north field. She said, what is wrong with his north field? Beckett said the same thing that was wrong with ours. He has been cutting it too many times, and it is giving less each year, and he does not know how to stop the direction it is going. She set the tack on the bench and wiped her hands. She said, does he want advice, or does he want me to tell him it is fine? Beckett said he wants advice. He is too proud to say so, but he drove 7 miles out of his way to come by here on a Tuesday morning, so I think we can assume he wants advice. She said, tell him I will come Thursday afternoon. Shaw was waiting for her at the gate of his property on Thursday, his hat in his hands, which she understood to mean that whatever pride had taken him this long to ask was still present, but had been temporarily set aside. He was a big man, and he moved like a man who was tired in a way that sleep did not fix, which she recognized because she had moved that way herself not so long ago. She walked his north field for 2 hours. He walked beside her, not talking much, watching where she looked and what she touched, and how she read the soil. She told him what she saw as she saw it in the plain, specific language she used for things that needed to be said plainly. The field was tired. It had been asked to give more than it could sustain. The drainage on the west edge was wrong, and had been wrong for years, pulling moisture away from the section that needed it most. The soil color told her it had not been rested in at least 4 growing seasons, maybe more. She told him what she would do if it were her field. She did not tell him what to do because it was not her field. She told him what she would do and why, step by step, and she told him it would take 2 seasons to see the full result, and 1 season to see the direction, and she told him the direction would be clear by fall if he started now. He listened. He asked 2 questions. She answered both. He had a small notebook in his breast pocket that she had not noticed until he took it out, near the end of the walk and began to write in it. And she slowed her pace without being asked, so he could write while they walked. When they were back at the gate, she said, "Your soil is not ruined. It is tired. There is a difference." He put his hat back on. He said Beckett said you turned his east field around. She said the field turned itself around. We gave it the conditions to do it. Shaw looked at her for a moment. He said, "He is lucky you answered that advertisement." She said, "I needed somewhere to land." He had somewhere that needed landing on. It worked out for both of us. Shaw nodded slowly. Then he said, "My wife has been after me to rest the Northfield for 2 years. I kept telling her the timing was not right. She said the timing is never right. You just decide to do it anyway." He looked at the Northfield for a long time. She waited. She had learned the value of waiting for the moment when a person caught up to what they already knew. He said, "I will start the drainage work next week." She said, "Good. Start at the west edge. And when you have questions, which you will come by." She said it simply, not as an offer exactly, more as a statement of how it would go, because she knew how these things went, that the questions came when you were in the middle of the work and something did not behave the way the plan said it would. She drove back to the Voss farm in the early evening, the light going amber across the valley, the east field visible from the road. As she turned onto the track, the rows coming in green, and even in the last of the day's light. She stopped the wagon for a moment at the gate and looked at it. 9 months. She had arrived with $14 and a letter from a man who had not met her train, and she had found a farm that was bleeding out slowly through a dozen small failures, and she had stopped the bleeding, the only way she knew how, which was by paying attention and doing the work and not looking away from what the numbers told her. She clicked the horse forward and came up the track to the yard. Beckett was at the paddock fence. Judge stood beside him, the big Morgan colt, Edie now his head dropping toward Beckett's shoulder in the comfortable way he had developed over the months. She had noticed the first time he did that. She had not said anything about it. She brought the wagon to the barn and got down and began to unhitch without being asked. Beckett came over and took the other side. He said, "How is the Shaw place?" She said, "The field is tired but recoverable." I told him where to start. He said, "Did he listen?" She said, "He wrote things down. That usually means listening." He made the sound. She handed him the harness, and he hung it on the hook by the barn door in the place it always went. She led the horse into the barn and got her settled and checked her water. When she came out, he was standing at the barn door, looking at the east field. The light was almost gone now, just a thin rim of gold along the ridge to the west, and the field had that quality to it, even in the near dark, a density and richness that you could sense if you had been watching it long enough. He said, "Pine's man came by while you were gone." She stopped. He said the fall numbers are ahead of the September projection. He came to say Pine is satisfied, and the note will be settled at the agreed terms. She stood in the barn door and looked at the field. She had known the numbers were ahead. She had been tracking them weekly. But knowing and hearing it said were different things, and she stood there for a moment and let them be different. He said, "We will be clear of the debt by October at the current rate." She said, "September if the east field finishes where I think it will." He said, "September then." She stepped out of the barn and stood in the yard. The last of the light was fading off the ridge. The air was warm for June, a real summer warmth, and the cottonwoods were full and dark against the sky, and the whole valley was settling into the quiet of a long day ending well. He came and stood beside her in the way she had come to know over these months, giving her the space she needed without being asked for it. She had never needed to explain that to him. He had simply understood it. She said, "I had a letter from my sister last week." He said, "How is she?" She said she is well. She asked when I was coming back to Missouri. He was quiet. She said I told her I did not think I was. A longer quiet. Judge had come to the paddock fence and was standing there in the dusk watching them the way he watched everything, with his own patient, deliberate attention. She put her hand in her coat pocket. Her fingers found the smooth gray stone the way they always did when she reached for it by memory, by the specific weight of it against her palm. She held it for a moment. Then she took her hand back out empty and let it rest at her side. He said, "You did not take it out." She said, "I noticed that." He said, "I have been watching you reach for it since October. You always brought it back out." She looked at the field. The rows she could not see, but knew were there, the soil that had come back to itself over these months, the drainage channel she had laid stone by stone in the October cold. She said, "I think I have been here long enough to know where I am." He was quiet for a long time after that. She did not fill the silence. She had learned that the silences between them were part of the conversation, that they carried things that words did not need to repeat. Judge made a low sound at the fence, easy and unhurried. He said, "Opal." She waited. He said, "I would like you to stay." She looked at the field. Then she looked at Judge at the fence. His ears forward, his breath rising softly in the warm evening air. She said, "I know." He said, "That is not an answer." She said, "I am still deciding." He said, "All right." She said, "But I am not deciding the way I was deciding things when I got off that train. I decided then by choosing not to look at what frightened me. I am not doing that now." He said, "What are you doing now?" She said, "I am looking at what is here, all of it, and deciding whether I believe in it." He said, "And..." She turned and looked at him then. In the last of the evening light, his face was the face of a man who had been holding something alone for a long time and had stopped holding it alone, and who knew it, and who was waiting for her to know it too. She said, "I believe in the East Field." He said, "That is not what I asked." She said, "I know." She turned back to the field. She said, "I believe in the drainage channel I laid in October in the cold. I believe in the cover crop we kept alive through the December frost. I believe in the harness I mended in the second week I was here, and in Cora making it through that November night, and in Judge deciding we were worth his time." She looked at him. She said, "And I believe the man who left the flour and oilcloth on the third shelf of the barn, where a person who knew what she was looking for could find, it was worth staying for." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the field. He said, "The East Field will need watching through July. The soil can dry faster than you expect in a dry summer out here." She said, "I know. I will watch it." He said, "And the Morgan colt still needs work before he is ready for sale." She said, "Another month, maybe 6 weeks. He is coming along well," he said, "and Shaw will have questions." "You said so yourself." She said, "I said I would be there when he did." He said, "You cannot do all of that from Missouri." She said, "No, I cannot." The quiet that came after that was different from the other quiets. It had a shape to it, a settled quality, the way a thing settles when it has finally found its right place and stopped moving. Judge had turned from the fence and was making his unhurried way along the paddock rail toward the water trough. She watched him go. She reached into her pocket one more time. The stone was there, smooth and gray-green, exactly as it had always been. She took it out and looked at it in the last of the light. It was a good stone. Her sister had pressed it into her hand the morning she left Missouri without a word. The way her sister had always communicated the things that mattered most. She had carried it through a long train journey and a stranger's wagon, and a first night in a strange room looking at a ceiling she did not know. She had carried it through October mornings at the East Field, and November nights in a cold barn, and December hours in a frozen field in the dark. She had carried it through every moment when she needed something solid to hold on to, while everything else was uncertain. She did not need to carry it that way anymore. She walked to the paddock fence and set the stone on the top rail, not thrown away, set down carefully in a place where the morning light would find it, where it could stay. She put both hands in her empty pockets and turned back to the field. Beckett stood beside her. Half a step back and to her left, the distance he had always kept close enough to be there far enough to leave her the space she needed. She had not asked him to do it that way. He had simply done it. The cottonwoods moved in the evening air. The east field lay dark and full, and ready for whatever the morning would bring. Judge reached the water trough and drank the quiet sound of it, carrying clearly across the yard. And then he lifted his head and stood still, easy in himself, at home in the dark. Rest the land before the land rests you, her grandfather had said. Rest the thing before it breaks on you. She had rested. She had not broken. She had come to Nevada with $14 and a stone in her pocket, and a letter from a man who could not be bothered to meet her train. She had stayed because the land needed her. And then she had stayed because she needed the land. And now she was staying because this was where she was. And it was enough, and it was hers. And the east field was coming in green, and the debt was nearly done, and the man beside her did not crowd her. And the Morgan colt had decided long ago that she was worth his time. That was everything. The last light left the ridge, and the stars came out one by one over the high desert, and the stone sat on the rail of the paddock fence, catching the first of the starlight, small and smooth and gray-green, exactly where she had put it. She did not reach for it. She did not need to.